Welcome back to At Home with Roby. I'm Patrick McIsaac from Roby Electric, along with guest host David McGuire from the Andrew Roby family of companies. I'm sure I got that wrong, David. We'll say Andrew Roby, General Contractor.
Andrew Roby. Yes, sir. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you. Trent is off on vacation today. He was unable to make the recording, but that's okay because we're going to make up with our guest, Ken Szymanski from the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association. Ken, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, sir. So, Ken, you are going to answer everybody's question in Charlotte that's not in the industry that we are in, which is somewhat construction, development, real estate. Why so many apartments?
Well, it's in response to demand. They haven't repealed the law of supply and demand yet. And demand is really strong for a variety of reasons. One is in-migration. A lot of folks are moving here. Another factor is the number of households that are apartment-type dwellers. We don't have as many dual-parent households with kids as we did a generation ago. In 1970, 40% of the households were dual-parent households with kids. Now it's 19.5%. So that's as a result, then more and more one-person households, non-traditional households, single-parent households, those all speak to apartment demand. And then more and more households rent. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe 33% or so of the households in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and environs rented. Now that number is about 42%. That share is about 42%. So that's a record share of households that are choosing to rent for a variety of reasons, including what happened in 2008 with the downturn and folks losing their value with their appreciation with the single-family product, and having more flexibility, mobility, the ability to move either internally within the metro area or outside for employment.
Very cool. And Ken, I read somewhere that you mentioned a stat where the average age of young people getting married has also tremendously increased. And does that have something to do with the demand that's being created for apartment complexes?
Sure, yeah. And it's as a result of postponing marriage, postponing becoming parents.
Responsibility.
Well, and and the size of student debts comes into play.
Sure, okay.
So people are stuck with that, and they're not as comfortable signing the dotted line on a mortgage agreement.
Well, no, I think that's great. I mean, Dave, you and I both were apartment dwellers at one point in our lives, and I think that you're obviously at one point as well. You were in that rental game where you were renting property as well, and saw something similar that I did. Because I obviously do that also.
Well, I'm 39, and so you go back 10, 15 years ago. I mean, before the recession, actually go back deeper than that, probably 20 years ago. Owning your own house was a big deal, and getting that as soon as you could was important. And Ken, I guess my question is there was a lot to be said about when the recession hit, people were worried about home values and, being able to get that return on investment. Is the afterburn from the recession still out there in the mindset of some of these young people about not wanting to invest and risk their financial future?
I think it planted a seed for many.
Yeah.
The comeback for single family has been strong the last couple of years, no doubt about that. And the appreciation is growing again. I mean, we're seeing values in single family that have finally rebounded from the 2007 levels to being at that level and higher. So that's good. And it's, having choice in the marketplace is good. And, what we're seeing with multifamily, too, is a variety of locations. Infill is important. People like that walkability. They like the ability to take transit, go to their neighborhood bar, restaurant, things like that. So the amenities of the neighborhood are as important as the amenities within the apartment community.
Well, no, it makes complete sense. And the amenities in the apartment community are absolutely astounding these days. I mean, compared to what we had when we were coming up in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, I mean, we're talking about like dog spas and just a myriad of things that attract tenants.
Yeah, and the rooftop terraces are popular in the business centers. You name it, volleyball. They make things fun and pertinent and relevant to the consumers.
Well, and to your point, I mean, it's not only the inside amenities, it's the outside amenities as well. So, I mean, it almost reminds you of like going to a Chicago or New York where you don't need a car. You park your car and you pay so much in rent for the car that, fortunately, we're not to that point here in Charlotte, but you park the car and you're good for a couple of months unless you need to travel outside of the city. So the walkability, public transit, all that stuff's starting to catch up.
Yeah, and the propensity to even own cars is dwindling some.
Sure.
People say, well, why would I want to be behind a wheel for 45 minutes or an hour when I can walk to stuff, walk to work, walk to play? and all my chums are around there and have a good time.
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, I have a brother-in-law, and they, before children, they lived in Chicago, and I remember going to visit him one time, and he couldn't find his car on Sundays. Like, I forgot where I parked it. It's somewhere in his parking garage, and those were before the days, where I think we ended up hitting the panic button and walked around for a little while, but he just didn't need it. I mean, he lived where he could walk to where he worked. He could take the I think the L in Chicago. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong.
Oh, it is called the L.
He could go wherever he wanted.
Yeah.
And we're getting to that point in Charlotte, obviously, with the light rail, the bus system that we have. Public transportation is catching up with the demand of the apartment complexes. But really, to your point, I mean, where these things are being built, you already have the restaurants. A lot of times you have the workplace as well.
Yeah. And a related point, of course, that's on the minds of many is the cost of this new apartment communities. And the fact is that construction costs have gone through the roof. Land is high cost, construction materials, labor. So a lot of these new apartments are renting, 2 bedrooms are renting from the neighborhood of $1,500, which is beyond the reach of middle income. I mean, you got to make close to $60,000 a year in order to afford that, unless you're in a roommate situation.
Sure.
But adding more supply, though, with the law of supply and demand, keeps rents lower in the older apartments, the ones that were built 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. And that's good for the overall marketplace. In fact, we've got one of the more affordable rental housing stocks in the 1970s and 1980s apartments in the nation among urban centers.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, well, so Ken, you mentioned that, and we have so many beautiful apartments with all these amenities, which they're fantastic. But some of your work has been circled around, how do we balance that with the affordable housing inside of these apartment units? I mean, how does that come to play so that we can stay a balanced community here?
Yeah, and adding supply is good in order to accommodate the population growth. So as we talked about, the 70,000 units that are projected between now and 2030. So that's an important part. And then, having reasonable government regulations. Some of these neighborhoods are going to be gentrifying, and there's going to be substantial renovations going on in the apartment communities, which has a tendency to both increase the quality but also increase the cost. But at the same time, some communities will just maintain their asset and have the quality be about the same, and a lot of those places will rent for $800, $850, $900 a month, which is affordable to folks that make $30,000, $35,000 a year.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I mean, I think we talked about this before. I think it's important to have that, a place for everybody, right? And Ken, I read a stat, and we talked about this before. This Dave and I both had to go back and double check to make sure we were right on this.
Sure. But
Charlotte needs 71,000 plus apartments by 2030 to keep demand. Is that an accurate figure?
Yeah, well, do the math on that, and that's just, 5,000 units a year or so.
Not too bad.
And that's about what we've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
So, I mean, right now, the metro area is like 2.4 million. There are people that are saying we're going to grow to 3.5 million folks by then. So it's in response to that demand.
Well, what that means is that the demand is going to remain strong, for the next, 13, 15 years in Charlotte. Well, that's the hope. Now, we might have a blip, but, Charlotte is obviously going to remain a very attractive place, according to the projections with the apartment study.
Yeah, and and we may see a recession or two in a 13-year window.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
But Charlotte's more recession-proof than many. Where was I going with that thought? Where was I going?
No, it's okay. We're more recession-proof. That's a good thing. It's kind of like we, even though we got hit hard during downtime, it wasn't like we were a Phoenix or a Florida or Vegas where they had all this speculation going on that really got hit hard. I mean, I think it seems like in Charlotte we grow, but we grow responsibly. Yeah.
So this study, the question is, what's the methodology of the study, and what's the assumptions, and who made it, and how credible is it? Was the Hoyt Affordable Housing Services.
Okay.
And they projected Charlotte to be like the 17th most number of units in the next 13 years.
Great.
But the growth rate is going to be 4th in the nation, with cities like Raleigh and Austin and Denver and others. So kind of a blended, we're in the top 10 nationally with those 71,000 units we're going to be adding. It's a blend of the actual units. Of course, New York City and Chicago still add a lot because the metros are so big, but the growth rate being as high as it'll be. So kind of blend those two stats and we come up with the 10th ranked number of starts in the USA over the next 13 years.
Well, you mentioned in-migration being one of the primary factors to that growth. And it's funny that we've had several people on this show that have gone to New York or Chicago in the investment banking field that have come back to Charlotte to start their own businesses just because of the quality of life. Obviously, you love Charlotte. We all love Charlotte. Charlotte's where our homes are. But the quality of life that we provide compared to New York or Chicago, it's just such a different thing. I mean, we have beach where the beach is, mountains where the mountains are, a healthy climate. It's not too cold. It's not too hot. So we're really fortunate to be here. Ken, can you stick around with the next segment?
You know it, brother.
All right, we'll be right back. You're listening to At Home with Roby.